Hello everyone and welcome to the Friday, May 29th demo for the distribution team. My name is Robert Marshall and I'm going to be demoing the current state of the Orchestrator. So on the plate today, we're going to set up two clusters. One is going to have one application node, three console nodes, two database nodes, and that will be a primary cluster named main, as seen here in this description. And the secondary cluster named geo1 is going to have one database, one application node. Now, this is going to push through and provision in Terraform on GCP. I'm going to go ahead and get this started because this does take a little bit of time. So it's going to provision Terraform, laying an outlay, showing this down here, this bottom left corner of my screen. So this is a description file that says what's going on. When we're doing geo, we add a config setup. We have cluster descriptions, which describes the cluster. And then we're going to add geo, which says our enablement. And then names which of these define here, which of these clusters is our primary cluster. And then also defines a listing of our secondaries. Making this more explicit helps us in the cases where you maybe have multiple clusters, because this will install multiple. So if I wanted to say install, two clusters for two teams and then a geo cluster for the main org, I could do that. Have three standalone clusters, one of them having a geo setup. So the configuration today is much smaller to keep it from running keep the demo from running a long time. Now, the expected outcome of where we're at right now is that we are going to get a primary up and running, and it's going to have the geo turned on and enabled, and we're going to get all the secrets, SSH keys copied over, and all of that is going to be there. What I'm expecting is that one of two things is going to happen on the secondary. One, there's going to be a flub of database migrations, because when I was testing yesterday, there was a glitch where it didn't set it up correctly because they didn't go in the right order. I fixed that manually, and I fixed the order in the playbook. So this will be my first time running it with all the fixes applied, all in line and run at once. I added everything I fixed along the way to the playbooks, but this will be the first end-to-end with all those fixes in play. I've also fixed things. There's SSH fast keys. So that's going to get installed today, and we managed by our Orchestrator. And that's where this is going. While this is running, something we can do. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So this is just a sample of what the configs look like when they come out. This is from my cluster from last night. So I tore this down so all these IP addresses are safe to have out there because they no longer exist. And all the passwords are ephemeral and they're for testing only. So this is the setup you can see down here where we're just going through. This is which node it is. So this is the geo1 clusters application node. So this is what the rendered files are going to look like when they get up. This is following, this is the database node. Main application node. And you can see that we're also, part of this, we're going through PG Bouncer to get the pooling benefit. So by default, even if you're not using the cluster form of Postgres, you are getting the pooling, which we know improves our performance. So that's already established in here. And console. These are all trying to go with minimum configuration. We're trying to go with the idea that we don't want to over-configure these nodes. Keep them as simple as possible. Here's database 1 for the prime. Primary has a lot more config because there's a lot more nodes. That's why it's so much longer. Replication slots is auto-calculated. And you can see here that config gets these both the geo and the Postgres like we expect. That's database 2 and database 3. Now, a little bit about the tech going on underneath here. The way these configurations work is they're actually being stored as as a dictionary. So if we look at, say, so, we don't actually template out and add all these things by themselves. We are using this. This is basically part of what was originally part of the provisioner. I've extended it a bit to make it basically like a overlay file system. So app.rb is your generic app. When console's enabled, when geo's enabled, these will fold over. So here they're going to recurse over. So I keep pointing at my screen because I'm silly. These items will each get converged. So the first one, anything that's in the second one, which here is the console RB, will overwrite what's an app. Geo overwrites both. So basically it's an overlay so we can keep adding things. So as we extend this, as we add more features, as we add more separation, we can continue this pattern to keep this dry and keep it together. So that is everything I have as far as, what I can show you while we wait for the playbooks to run. So I'll pause for a moment and say, are there any questions?
Quick one. In terms of the generation of the configurations, how hard is it to add additional configuration bits to this in case somebody needs to have an intermediate step in it to add some sort of custom configuration in terms of like the generated GitLab.rb?
Okay, well, when you're talking about adding it, do you mean dynamically and not altering the runbooks, or do you mean like there's basically right now there's not a way to inject it dynamically, but the runbook also has a template, so you could add a single one-liner into the template, or you could add the section to the appropriate place, like say in the app RB.
Okay, so
right.
you could add whatever you want customly to the runbook itself. Well, to the runbook template, I should say.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And at some point, actually, this would be a great thing to open an issue for, the ability to have like a user added override that gets merged in after everything else, so that if someone really wants to override, they can. That's probably a really good feature.
Right.
How would that work with upgrading? Like if we released a new version of the Orchestrator and a customer has a bunch of overrides, would that carry over?
Well, for this particular piece, yes, because the overrides are going to go into this. Basically, if the structure of this, like if we compare this, let's see.
And the override is more what is going to be injected into the GitLab RB structure, less about what, like any behavior inside of the orchestrator itself. It's not a change to the code base of Orchestrator. The idea is to have a method where they can say, merge this over the top once you're done generating this.
Right. Because like if we look at this GitLab Rails piece right here, auto migrate DB host, that's getting reflected out here. That's how it renders out. Those key names are actually the entry point.
Right.
So if you're adding things
to this, basically.
Right. So
okay.
if you're following our documentation and you want to add something and you know what the top level key and then the sub keys are, then you could, once I've added the piece, you could easily put an override, and I can just say this overrides everything else. Jason, would that sufficiently, like, because that way it's something ephemeral. You can just put it outside and add it like before. Is that something that works?
Right. So, like the example case is injecting a CA. Right. It's not something where you're not going to be necessarily overriding the PG bouncer because BG Bouncer is going to be fully installed and configured through the Orchestrator. But say you definitively want to have 3 or 4 additional CAs because your system will eventually be reaching out to internals that are a separate system. The user would supply those parts, and then we'd actually have a way to add the additional item to anything in GitLab RB that is needed. As an example, it's not a great example, but it's a functional example.
It's actually a really great example because one of the next things that I would need to open up an issue for is to fit the SSL support in directly, because right now, like, the testing is ephemeral, so I can't use the Let's Encrypt setups. So supporting a fixed SSL and getting CAs in is actually a next step in the next iteration. So that would be a great call out to make sure that that functionality exists specifically for that as well. Let me add these into the notes here. And Jason, I feel like we kind of took a long way around. So did I answer your question to the point where you're comfortable, or do you have more follow-up?
No, that's pretty good for the moment.
Okay. Any other questions?
I like that we're dialing into a specific example. I think that helps. If we can come up with other specific examples, once we get the issue created, we can throw them in there.
Yeah, so I feel like thinking through what that all entail. There's at least 3 in there: SSL deployment, injection of specific things, and then specifically getting the CA injection documented. So I think that's like 3 separate concerns at minimum.
Yeah, it's a wide case, so it does actually have a number of things to break everything down. It's a good starter issue that is then turned into a bunch of small items.
Yep. So. Let's see. I guess I'll riff for a moment since I'm not hearing other questions on things that I've noticed. So, trying to figure out how to put together a open an issue and start some MRs against the actual the documentation parts of Geo. Reason being, let me see here. So, like, here's Geo documentation for multiple clusters, and somehow this escaped its frames. There we go. So the steps here say to go through each of these individual steps. But one of the interesting things is that when you come here to like Geo for multiple servers, and it says this, but this is not a replacement. This primary role has to be in addition to the other roles that were already set. And this says, configure and add the following. We'll add the following, but this line's a replacement, right? So that's not, this is kind of odd. So some of this documentation, like when going through it, trying to unwind what it means and what's a replacement versus what's an addition to is a little confusing. So that's a kind of a side piece that I'm going to go back through. Once everything is working, I'm going to start trying to help with the documentation so that this is clearer for the next person. I don't know. I know, DJ, I know you set up Geo before. So does anybody else run into that same thing with this?
I haven't run into, well, okay, I have run into a similar problem where it wasn't clear from the documentation which rules to set. Yeah, I haven't run into this. Like, I think you probably ran into the primary rule, and you likely also needed the application role as well on the one
The
you're
application
running
role
into? Yeah.
and the Postgres role, and like in Ash's notes, he creates like an FDW and does some SQL injection. I haven't found that anywhere listed in the Geo main documentation, so I'm not sure if it's even required or if it's just there. So that's kind of an open issue. I updated the issue last night, like before I was, and asked for some other eyes. I've got some Geo and some support folks that are following it. So, because yeah, there's a couple of things that, like, there are 4 or 5 folks that have done various attempts at Geo, and there are pieces in some and not in others, and about a third of them aren't even in the main documentation. So it's one of those: do they need to be documented? Where do they go? What do they mean? Why are we doing these things? There's a lot of context, and that context being lost, I think, is one of the biggest challenges, which is probably a challenge why our customers have a challenge with it. Because it's just, there's a lot in here. When Eric was in our conversation last week, he said, there's, I forget how many hundreds of steps to deploy this. When you add it all up, even condensed, it's a couple hundred steps or 1,000 steps or something to that effect. So that is a thing that I want to go through and clean up, so that as we go through this until Orchestrator is in GA, the documentation is a little bit cleaner. And it'll also help with just, as we go through and troubleshoot Orchestrator and get reviews. So that's just a piece. Let's go back and look and see how this is doing. This is still running. Yep. So I keep going. Are there any other questions?
I definitely have to agree that geo documentation is verbose and somewhat indirect. Trying to figure out exactly how everything works was an absolute pain for me. When we did the implementation of GitLab Geo support within the charts, the resulting docs that I wrote ended up being significantly smaller than the upstream documentation in a very condensed form. Now, admittedly, there's many things not happening in the documentation for the charts. Link to that specific documentation page added to the notes. But it's amazing how much simpler 11 steps are than 15 pages of documentation when it comes to the actual omnibus. And it's basically came down to me breaking down what those steps actually are, what features actually need to be on or not, and what things actually need to cross-communicate. That being said, I don't have clustering involved, I don't have console in there, and I have a very basic look, stand it up, there's a database here, there's a database here. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of a lot of the config kind of cleanup came out of your chart documentation, Jason. So when I work on this, it's on the issue, but I have like there are 5 or 6 sources of this is how Geo should be installed. So I'm hoping that kind of as a side effect of all this, that we can align those for less overall confusion. So.
Right, and we should make sure that we're engaging with the Geo team to see what improvements we can have with that.
Yep, I agree. Okay, so the primary node just got set here. So while this is running, let me go up here and grab the application IPs, so I can start setting myself up to connect to these. Let's see, first one, that's the Geo1 cluster, application node. Second one is the prime.
I'm guessing in this case you're setting up host files to point to it.
I didn't catch like the last 6 words. In this case, you're setting up.
Like host files. You're doing it off screen, so we don't really know what you're doing.
Oh, no, I'm just copying the IP addresses to a text pad so that when this is up, I can just copy paste and not have to go back and look again.
Ah, okay.
When this is all done, I can run the fetch logs again, and we can look at, or not fetch configs, and we can look at all those and start working on diagnostic. One of the other issues that we should open out of here, that's a thing that I know about, I don't think I opened an issue for it yet. We have a double run of the configuration piece of the package piece, which we don't need to run because common is injected. The common role is injected twice, and that's just by virtue of the fact that as I ported things over, it's there. So that's probably another thing that we should open up as a future iterative improvement, is to untangle that so that there's not a double call of a common role. It's something that wasn't really annoying when it was only a few machines in a cluster, but when you stand up 15 machines, it's kind of a lot. So.
Right, and it's a perfect example of if you don't have to run reconfigure on something as large as the omnibus, don't. Because when it's 1, it's not bad. When it's 10, it's expensive.
Yeah. So another thing that I would probably appreciate some help with, probably next couple of days, when all of this works, my goal right now is to get this to where I can just manually add the GO1 in the console over to the main application. There is an API that that Kat pointed out in the issue, and I'm not very well versed in just curl calling APIs, so I don't want to go to all the trouble of writing a Python module for Ansible for this yet. So if anyone that has experience just calling curl, doing things, Jason, I know you do, but I know there's other folks. I know you're busy, but I would really appreciate help in crafting that curl call, just so that we can get this minimum viable over the line and have it automatically inject the node, and then we'll clean that up later once we have the proof of concept. Okay, there was a lot of red. So that was Geo application 1. So that was one of the 2 modes I expected. We're gonna bring that over and count the text. We can deal with Geo1 in a second. So this is the primary application code. You know what? Let me do this off screen so I don't pull up every password in the world on recording. Now, one of the things you'll notice from the last demo is that now we have a default password that's set for us. That is both, I've set the password, but also if you don't set one, it will give you a password, and you can run a decrypt playbook that'll show you the password. That's one of the most recent things merged in. That was thanks to our red team and I had a discussion about some of the stuff with popping up with security pipelines, and that's direct results. So thank you to Chris Moberly and Paul Harrison. They were real great partners. We discussed what was going on and what needed to be happening, and thanks to them, we now have an improvement. All right, so we're logged in. We're gonna head over here. Also merged in and not just part of the work in progress, we now have a license. So that's just by default, even with just regular clusters. If you install just one cluster, not Geo, you can have your license installed. So that's no longer here. That was separated out to a smaller iteration and merged. So looking at Geo, you can see that Geo is turned on. It does understand that this primary node is healthy. Okay. Yeah, we understand this. This is why we need the SSL piece. Current node and its primary labeled main. So that all works as we expect. So we've got that much far going. So now let's go turn our faces to the application node. So, and we are 3 minutes at a time. I'm going to continue going. So just, if you need to drop, it is okay. Because it's 3 minutes. So we're technically 2 minutes past. We're supposed to end at 5 minutes still. But I'm going to keep going and debugging this. So Geo application 1. Geo application 1 over here. All right. Hilariously, last night in my sleep, I dreamed that maybe we probably would have put a log for this, and there it is. All right. No such database. Okay. Okay. So that tells me that migrations didn't run. I'm not gonna tried to do a reconfigure. Did all that. All right. So that tells me that there's a database migrate, right? That's a database migration for initial seeding, right?
That I can't quite see the entirety of the log, but it's definitely a case where it's literally saying there's no database.
I wonder if that means that there needs to be a secondary database migration. Just
Yeah, there has to be a separate secondary database seeding behavior. And it does not follow the same automagic as the primary database. So when you say, hey, run DB migrations, it doesn't go, oh, hey, there's no database here. Let me seed that for you. Geo doesn't do that. So you have to manually say, go seed the thing.
the thing is, we're not using auto seeding. We're actually, the playbook is running that command. Let me make this that command.
Yeah, that does not run the geo.
Yeah, the command is geodb. I think the initial one is setup, and then after that, it expects you to be running geodb migrate.
Right. Let me pull up the GitLab Rails CNG container. The DB migration script in there has the actual geo call for when it's running in geo mode. Yeah, we have a geodb migrate, and it is geodb setup. We call that, and then once that is fully performed, you have to manually call the geodb refresh foreign tables.
Okay. So look at the call doc. If you could paste that into the call doc, and then I have not seen that anywhere in the docs yet. So,
No. That was fun to figure out.
yay.
It is buried in the docs, but it's in like how to set up the database. Because you have to set up the full primary, and then once you have the actual primary database with FDW turned on and the user created, then you go over to the geo node and do the geodb setup, and then perform the geodb refresh. This is buried in the geo database setup and configuration, and that was just painful to figure out.
Well, then I will stand atop your shoulders. Thank you.
Speaking of this, while I'm staring at it, DJ, the structure.sql stuff hasn't started hitting the database. The geo side has it.
Not yet. It will.
Yeah, I know it will. I'm just like, please tell me we haven't forgotten something.
I thought I added an E to migrate. While that runs, I'm gonna throw out a postulated question that I've been thinking about the last week or so. The way that I do secrets right now is it downloads the SSH files to local. So setup fails, migrate fails.
Right, because there's also, you have to actually create the database. It won't actually create the database.
Omnibus should have created it, though.
I guess that's first the question, like if Omnibus is supposed to create it, right? What causes it to create it? Because the package order of operations, right? The package is installed, and then this file is set up.
All right, reviewing.
Do the migrations have to be run directly on the database node?
So the database creation should have been run on the Geo Postgres node.
And let me get out of this.
It should have been done as part of the Geo PostgreSQL recipe in Omnibus.
Let's
Yeah.
go to that machine. Let's see, database. Geo1 is this one.
And what's the role on this one?
Well, we're about to find out. Probably should. Geosecondary rule. No? Okay. Geo Postgres is on. The right listing address configured with that. Okay. FTW is turned on. GitLab Rails DB password is configured.
Yeah, I would check the logs on this, the reconfigure logs on this one to see what happened. It should have created the database.
Why is log cursor enabled here? Oh, you're running it all on the same node.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, everything. Yeah, that was something that I asked about in Geo last night, because from the documentation, log cursor sounds like it's a Rails app, but then it's not a Rails app. What I figured out is it's some kind of a service. So
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to check because this is not how I set it up personally. I was like, oh, that's different.
yeah, setting it to its own node will be an improvement iteration.
Yeah, it's not a hard requirement. You can technically run like 5 copies of the log cursor, and you can run on every single database node as a part of the geo pair, as long as it's talking to wherever the master is.
Yep. So, all right, I'm gonna head over to the configure logs, Jason, if you're.
Go for it.
Okay. So here's our reconfigure logs. DJ, just a keyword like geo.
There should be a task run that actually creates the database.
It scrolls with highlighting.
Yeah, you could search for like one that comes after it. Like if you look for a refresh foreign, it should have been called. And then we would expect the database before it.
Yeah, foreign isn't there at all.
There we go.
That turns foreign on.
Oh, we see above it though that it supposedly created the database.
And so I see GitLab Geo PostgreSQL user, create GitLab database, GitLab Geo production. What user is it trying to use when it explodes?
We can go look at that. Let me just real quick.
Okay.
Let's go back to the other node. Huh. That user and password is supposed to be there.
I also noticed at the bottom you actually have the geo secondary host set to yourself.
Here's another thing I'm seeing right now.
This is PG Bouncer.
You're setting up the PG Bouncer to use effectively the public IP, at least by the host name, but on the DB instance, you're using the private IP. So it's a matter of it's trying to connect to the wrong IP and
Well, in this case, it's literally saying there is no database. It's connected to something. Or it would say can't connect to database.
so yeah, you're right. Okay.
So I'm wondering if we're like somehow logging into the wrong user. We're using GitLab instead of GitLab Geo, so we're connecting to the wrong database. I mean, the Geo's PostgreSQL should be on a different port.
Well, the thing is, shouldn't the connection to that database exist here in PG Bouncer?
They're separate databases. They're like, according to the application, they're technically separate. I've never used PG Bouncer with Geo, so I can't tell you.
I'm just looking at this thinking that, you know what? I guess a great way to find out would be oh, it's Geo something. I think it's Geo something. GitLab Geo. There's GitLab Geo here. Yep. Okay. So I'm gonna have that and do a reconfigure. Does that seem sensible to see if we can get that to connect that way? Then we would need to do a GeoDB setup after this. Oh, I saw an error. Password for user PG Bouncer. No password supplied. Role GitLab Geo does not exist. Okay.
Which database is that connected to? Is it connected to the Geo database or is it connected to the Postgres database? There's a big difference. So can you pull up a Geo primary node?
Geo primary database node.
Right. So the geo secondaries primary database node, the master database node on the geo secondary.
Okay. I'm here.
Okay. Now let's look at its GitLab.rb. PostgreSQL is listening on public IP address, and PostgreSQL is listening on that. So what ports are those processes listening to? Just pop out and run, you're in sudo, so sstack tlnp. So we've got one listening on port 5432 and one on 5431. And since that's listening on the public IP address as opposed to 000, the geo database is listening on port 5431.
Yep.
Are we sure that the generated configuration is telling GitLab to connect to the right place? We want to check var opt GitLab Rails
I'll be on the other team
config.
now.
Etc. And database underscore geo. That is attempting to connect to localhost port 6432, which will not exist correctly unless you have something redirecting 6432 to the 6431.
PG bouncer, yeah.
Okay, so PG, somebody help me here. Where do we double check the configuration of the running PG bouncer on the node that we're at that will point to the correct port on geo? This is one of those, I'm not familiar with PG bouncer, so I have to ask.
Like this to get to the console. Oh! That's broken because of this. So let me take this bit out and reconfigure so that we can actually connect to the console. I knew that was going to error out that way, but so it's not going to change it directly. So let me think. PG bouncer INI. The file is PG bouncer INI, and I always forget where it puts it. Oh, there's the INI omnibus. bouncer what goes to PG bouncer data directory. Bar op GitLab at the right place for this? Feel like it's somewhere else. There we go. I'm just doing what I would expect. Oh. As the admin users for both. So does that migration have to get run over on the database host instead of here?
It should be run wherever you can actually reach the database. Technically, you could run it from somewhere else. I have always traditionally run it on the same host, but again, I haven't been running a cluster of any kind. I haven't been using PG Bouncer. Yeah, you take the line number off. Unfortunately, Ben doesn't understand that's what it means.
Databases.ini.
That's probably generated, yeah, somewhere in there.
That be owned by root?
Owned by root, readable by GitLab pSQL. So
Saying databases ini is nil.
it says pull the options for databases INI or the attributes for PG Bouncer databases INI, if not nil. So options is part of the call into the initialize, and then something breaks there. So somehow database INI is nil, or the attributes from the omnibus GitLab.rb are coming in as brokenly nil.
Go look at this is the attribute, so not nil, but
Where is the database INI attribute? It's just databases. So we'd have to look at what that is actually generating and what could be causing that issue. Right now, I'm looking through the documentation to try and figure out how this is supposed to be configured.
Yep.
So it's supposed to be reading, yeah, we're not even getting to the point where it's supposed to be reading the databases .json to try and pull that in. It's exploding before that.
I'm just going to try something really quick. I bounced bouncer.
Yeah, I don't think that the bouncer's problem with omnibus code is exploding. Yeah, GitLab pSQL doesn't have a methodology to reach out to. That's weird. Does that file not exist?
Databases.ini.
No. The opt GitLab, etc. GitLab pSQL-RC.
I'm on the application though, so possibly not.
Okay, so yeah, GitLab pSQL is probably not going to function in that case. All right, so can you show me the GitLab.rb for this application node again?
Yep.
Okay, so so there should be nothing about your PG Bouncer databases entry, the one that you had in place, that should have had any problems whatsoever that's causing the explosion. Something else is causing the inability to load the database configuration options. So what you had added here to get to the GitLab HQ Geo production was not the problem.